Good evening. It's good to see everybody here. Pretty nice night to be inside, though. But you got that glass block window there, so maybe that helps. I don't know. Do you want to just start off with your questions? Is that what you want to do?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
National security. Am I on or am I low? Mrs. Vale, come on in. Too late? No,
Nope.
ma'am.
Just getting started.
Hello?
There, now you're working.
Now I'm working. National security and the U.S. action towards ISIL is a hot topic right now. Do you agree with the president's plan of action?
What's happening in the last week, I support. My concern is, first of all, I don't know why he didn't do something sooner. You know, obviously ISIL and ISIS are bad news, and anybody that can behead people and stuff, you can't negotiate with them, unfortunately. And so I was glad to see last night they started going after the oil refineries in northern Syria that ISIL controls. That is, we've known about that for quite some time. It's bringing in $2 to $3 million a day. They're on the black market oil. That's how they're getting a lot of revenue. So if you can decapitate them, you know, the revenues, that you know, helps big time. And so, you know, he seems I've always questioned if his resolve, the president's resolve, and where he goes. But so far, you know, at some point he'll need to come to Congress. But I think they should have acted on this sooner. And I think we missed an opportunity, especially when ISIS was moving across from Syria and Iraq. It's not like that there's a jungle there. When they had those convoys coming across the desert, we could have took them out. But so far, the air power seems to be working, and we'll see. I did vote on the in the CR to the president asked for authorization to train some Syrian rebels that they vetted. It's not a whole lot in Saudi Arabia territory. He is the commander-in-chief, so you know we try to support the commander-in-chief as much as we can. You know, we should rally in a time of war. I'm a little discouraged that he calls this counterterrorism. I think we're at war, and we ought to handle it like we're at war, and we should never tell publicly, because he told the enemy, what we're not going to do. Now I understand why he said we're not going to put boots on the ground in a combat situation, because it's political. But the president should never tell what we're not going to do. And just like when we did the surge in Afghanistan, and at the same time he pretty much announced that when we're pulling out of Afghanistan, you can't do that. So that's, you know, where we're at. But I think we have to be concerned about this terrorist group and this other one they took out the other night, or bombed the other night. I can't, it starts with a K. I can't remember the name exactly. This is a new one. Connaissant, yeah. And now we're concerned because they're recruiting Westerners and some Americans into this terrorist outfit using social media and other things. And so there's always the threat of what they call a lone wolf, somebody that just is radical and crazy and do something here in this country or in Europe. And so I know they put out a bulletin to all the law enforcement across the country to be more aware that we could be vulnerable.
When it comes to national security, do you agree with the president taking executive action?
Well, I think it depends what it is. When it's immediate and you know, the threat's there, you can't always wait for Congress, not in town all the time in D.C., to take action. So we have the War Powers Act. He has so many days after he takes action to come to Congress to get authorization. And if the president's doing the way he should be doing, he should be consulting with leadership in Congress those times. I believe he did consult with leadership right before the bombing started in Syria. So the leadership knows, and also the chairman of those respective committees. So, you know, but I think there's a time when the president does need to go to come to Congress and rally the American people why we need to do this and what we need to do, and have clear, defined mission, what that mission is. And it was a little, I think it's an issue. The military is always doing scenarios have options. They're always doing their research and studies, and apparently the president has rejected some of the military's recommendations of how we should move, and that's a little concerning. I think we should have left a residual force of, say, 15,000 troops in Iraq to keep some stability there while they kept trying. Pulling out, I think, created more of this problem we have with ISIS in Iraq.
Tax reform is something that's very important to you. Can you give us some examples of changes you would like to see and how you think those changes can be implemented?
Well, we need some tax reform. I think it's on 75,000 pages. There's all kinds of deductions and credits, and some are good and some are maybe not so good. The rates are too high right now. We have the highest the corporate rate is 35%, which is the highest rate now in the industrialized world, and that's why you hear so much about these tax inversions, and we can talk about that if you want. And then on the individual side, which also includes not just individuals but pass-through entities, your LLCs, limited liability companies, and S-corps are pass-through entities, and they're paying on the individual side. And depending what your income is, you can be about 44% now, just on the federal side. That doesn't count, your state and local taxes. And so our taxes are too high. I support lowering the taxes down to the top rate at least 25%. I also strongly support allowing our multinational corporations that have businesses operations overseas to bring those profits back and not be started at 35% tax rate. What's happening is they pay the taxes in those foreign countries, and then they have to, what they bring back, if they bring anything back, they start at 35%. So consequently, not much is coming back. And back in the mid 2000s, they did, quote, tax holiday for a year. A lot of it came back. But they had all kinds of strings attached, and I would say there shouldn't be any strings attached. Now, I do support taxing it at 5% instead of 35%, and putting it all in the Highway Trust Fund to help fund the Highway Trust Fund. And I know in the corporate America there's support for that. And then the other 95%, they can do what they want. Basically, there's only really two things they can do: either invest it in their businesses and expand their businesses and create jobs, or pay dividends. There's not a whole lot more they can do with it. So I don't know the reason why we had to have all those strings before, and they did that about 10 years ago. At Washington, the issue isn't really on revenue. This last fiscal year, the federal government brought in a record amount of revenue, about over $2.7 trillion. But we were spending about $3.6 trillion because we made cuts in discretionary spend. Mostly, we were just over $3.4 trillion. So there's where your deficit is, between the 2.7 and 3.4. And so it's on the spending side where the problem is. And on the spending side, I mentioned this because when I was in the state legislature, it's totally different how we do it in Columbus. In Columbus, we have a biennial budget, and when our state senators, state reps do the biennial budget, everything's on the table. Okay, well, in Congress, when we do they're supposed to do. They haven't been very good at this, but they got the 12 appropriation bills, and that's what I call discretionary spending. That's what's on the table, and that's only about a third of total spending now. The other 2/3 of spending is on autopilot, and that would be your entitlements, food stamps, and interest. And when I was a kid, and a lot of us here were kids, and I know some here it's not going to affect, but people, baby boomers, when we were kids, it was the other way around. 2/3 was basically discretionary spending, so that gave Congress a lot of discretion about where to prioritize taxpayer dollars. Put more in the NASA, the space program, put more in health research, infrastructure, and now that pie is shrinking, the discretionary side, because the mandatory side is growing so fast, and the discretionary side is the funding that funds all the federal agencies and defense. When I got to Congress, that kind of set me back a little bit, thinking defense is discretionary, and because that's the #1 responsibility of the federal government is national defense. And so I've been a little concerned about what's happened in the defense spending. Before the sequester, defense was cut, and I supported this, cut about 8%, about $48 billion a year for 10 years, for about $480 billion over the 10-year period. And then when the sequester kicked in, that was another 8 to 9% cut, all in defense. So in January of this year, we kind of leveled. What we did, I supported that in the budget, in the CR, where it was. there's a valley, and this January the sequester was going to be 100% defense cuts, and it was going to be pretty deep cuts. And what's going on in the world and everything, I don't think that's a very bright thing to do. So we kind of leveled that valley out, and going forward, all sequester and discretionary spending will be cuts in growth going forward. It has been cuts in actual dollars, less from the year before. And for the last 3 years now, discretionary spending is less than the year before, 3 years in a row. That puts us down to about 2008 levels. So that's real cuts, not cuts in growth. Yeah, that's another thing you got to learn about Washington. When they were talking in the past about cutting spending, it was cuts in growth of spending, because they had the baseline spending they did back in the start in the 70s. And so now we've actually done some real cuts, and now that will start going back up a little bit, but the growth on the discretionary side won't be as fast as they had anticipated. Now, the problem is that 2/3 that mandatory, and the only way you can get your arms around that, you have to go in and reform those programs. You have to change who's eligible for food stamps, for example. You know, I'm all for helping people that need help, but there's a lot of people that maybe are abusing the system, and so things to reform those programs, and that counts, you know, Medicare and Social Security and all that, and make sure that they're going to be sustainable, so people that are in retirement now or close to retirement have it, and the people that, you know, are working age, you know, 20s, 30s, 40s, you know, make sure that it's there for them in the future. But where we're headed, it's questionable what's going to happen in the future, because it's not sustainable.
You mentioned using tax reform to help fund highway improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Does any of that plan filter down to townships and counties? Because here, our township trustees and our county engineer really struggle to find money to fix our roads. So is there any room in that to help on a local level?
I gotta test my memory here a little bit. The federal, okay, you got 29 cents here in Ohio of gas tax. That's the state collects. 18.4 cents of when you buy gas goes to the Federal Highway Trust Fund. And when it comes back, when you're talking, like, let's use an example like I-71 when they're rebuilding it, I believe that's 90% federal cost share and the state's 10%. And then there's a lower percent in the federal when they're just doing resurfacing and that kind of stuff. So it depends if it's a new project and old projects. Some of it filters down to counties. We'd have to check on the township deal. But some of it does, because you get, and the state, because the state, it comes back to the state, and the state has here in Ohio anyways, has what they call a track process, trying to prioritize where to spend the dollars, and they use some federal dollars. So I would guess that some of it does, maybe not so much the townships though, and I think that's more of the states, how the state of Ohio, how they do that. But that's kind of, you know, the federal government, especially the interstate highway system, is paying a lot of it, my understanding, and then when you get state highways and that, it's less and less, and it comes from the states. But there's kind of a partnership there.
And kind of back to the tax reform, middle-class families across the country and in Knox County are really feeling a squeeze. How can you move these tax reforms forward to benefit?
Well, there's no doubt our hardworking middle-class people are feeling the squeeze, because the cost of food, the cost of energy, you know, has been going up, you know, over a number of years now, and their incomes are stagnant. Their incomes haven't. And then a lot of people, unfortunately, have been forced into part-time work, mainly because of the health care law, and so that's not helping them. So the median incomes are flat or going down. So tax reform, where that can be a help, is keeping more money in the individuals' pockets and the businesses, so they have that to reinvest in their businesses. Because when you're taxing, like let's say on the corporate, the 35%, and there's no industrialization that's taxing that high, and so it puts them in a you know, not in a very good competitive position, and we're in a global marketplace now, so it's a challenge, so historically, if you look at this, when you lower the rates, because people change their behavior. When the rates are so high, people will go out of their way to do things to legally try to avoid paying taxes. And then when the rates are lower, they won't spend so much time doing that, and they'll spend more productive time in their businesses or whatever they're doing. And so long term, I would argue history will show you when the federal government has cut tax rates not immediately, but in a reasonable amount of time, you'll see more money, more revenue coming to the federal government because we have a growing economy, and that's leads to another thought. How do we get out of this mess? We got $17.5 trillion debt and growing, and we've seen the deficits go from trillion and a half down to less than $1 trillion in the last few years. But CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, the track we're on, says that's kind of a temporary law. It's going to increase a lot of it because of the baby boomers is part of it, and going on the system in the retirement system, and so we have to figure that out. But we can't. We got to get out of this mess we're in. We've got to. I think we have to do two things. We can't not cut spending enough to get out of the mess. It doesn't work because unless you're going to go in there and gut Social Security, which nobody supports. Okay, that's not going to happen because that's where a lot of it's going. And so what you have to do, we've got to be fiscally responsible, but then we also got to do policies that grow the economy and then bring more revenue in. Now, if you notice, the economy's only been growing 1% to 2% GDP growth. That's almost unprecedented considering the downturn, because there's business cycles, and we went through a severe downturn here, 08 and 09, and in modern history we're in the worst economic recovery we've ever been. And I would argue it's the policies coming out of Washington of high taxes, very burdensome regulations. When I talk to business people, some of and I've got some bills dealing with some of them on the regulatory side, and it just stifles the confidence to make investments and takes more. People are spending more time with all the red tape and all that, and so that's not helping to grow the economy. This economy should be growing between 4% and 6% GDP. Now, if that was happening, if we brought in a record $2.7 trillion last fiscal year, I don't know what this fiscal year ends here at the end of this month. And that was during a stagnant economy. Can you imagine what would happen if we were growing at 4 or 5% instead of less than 2%? And so you got to make that pie bigger and then be fiscally responsible at the same time.
How can America be more energy efficient, and what's Congress done to push that initiative?
Okay. The good news is America, the United States, can be energy independent within a decade if we were serious. And if you couple that with Canada and North America, there's no doubt about it. We've got more natural gas than anywhere in the world now because of new technologies, and the technology is horizontal drilling. We've got these shale plays, and we got one here just east of here in eastern Ohio, the Utica. You got the Marcellus in Pennsylvania. You got the Balkan in North Dakota, which now North Dakota last year, this is interesting, North Dakota last year, that Balkan produces more oil than natural gas, but North Dakota became the #2 energy producing state ahead of Alaska. It's Texas and North Dakota. Used to be Texas and Alaska or vice versa. And you got the Eagle Ford in Texas. You got a whole couple dozen shale formations around the country, and that's what's really driving the economy right now. You go in eastern Ohio, it's driving the economy, and what we're seeing. I'm glad you mentioned this because it's really important. What we're seeing in eastern Ohio, we've seen in Youngstown and Lorain, 2 steel mills up and running now, making pipe for the oil industry. Several hundred employees each place. That wouldn't be happening. So there's lots of things happening. We're seeing resurgence, I think, manufacturing, because in the manufacturing sector they're highly energy intensive, and they need to have a reliable, affordable energy supply, and natural gas is a big part of that. So we're seeing, and then some of the, if we get a cracker plant where they take the hydrocarbons that's coming out of these wells, the ethylene and all that, and crack it, it's at least 10 times multiplier, because you get plastics, bio chemicals, and paints, and all kinds of different industries. So that's good, and we have enough. We could actually be an exporter of LNG. So the good news is we can be energy independent. And most of the energy renaissance in this country has come on state and private lands. Federal land, oil and gas exploration has actually declined double digits. And so the federal government could be doing more, and we can do this safely. I think your next question might be your next question. I got a feeling is about fracking and the safety.
Yes, sir.
I'll just take it on right now. I actually chair a committee in Congress that deals with the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA and the water side. And we had a couple hearings last Congress, and we had experts from all around the country and regulators, and they testified that we've been fracking in this country for 60 years. Now, given it's vertical, not the horizontal, but it's basically the same. And there's not one instance of fracking in 60 years, fracking itself contaminated water aquifer. When there has been contamination, it's because of a couple things. Poor well construction. Now think about this. Our water wells in this area are 50 to 300 feet. That's kind of the range in Ohio. And we're down at these levels on the Utica, 4,000 to 6,000 feet, okay, way below. Now, Mother Nature, geology, if it didn't handle this, even before humans were on this earth, if the geology was wrong, the stuff down at 4,000 to 6,000 feet, the hydrocarbons, the salt water, all the bad stuff that's down there would migrate up and contaminate the water aquifer. The reason it doesn't get contaminated because the geology takes care of that. So the only way it can migrate up there, if there's a conduit, the well hole, the borehole that's going down through the ground, and if it's not sealed off, cemented right, correctly, that creates basically a conduit for bad stuff to migrate up, and also stuff on the surface to go down and contaminate the water aquifer. And so it's very important that these wells are constructed right. That's why we got to have the right regulatory environment, and that's why they started doing the triple casing and triple cementing. It's redundancy, because there was an issue over in the Marcellus a few years ago in Pennsylvania where they had a contamination because the well wasn't constructed right. So the industry, is working hard to make sure that happens right. Another way that we have contamination in Ohio especially, we have a lot of what we call orphan wells that were put in the 20s and 30s and then abandoned. I bought my first farm in 1975, and we had I discovered 3 orphan wells on my farm, and at the time I didn't know what they were. There was just a steel casing coming out of the ground, about 18 inches out of the ground, and it was a big pain because you had to farm around it. And I was at a Farm Bureau meeting back in those days, and the guy from the ODNR was in there, and at the policy meeting was talking about how they have a program to plug orphan wells. And I said, I think I got those things. And I didn't know. And you could drop a penny down them, and about 20, 30 seconds later, here it goes splash. And they came out and they plugged them, and they cut them off and capped them there, so I don't have to farm around them anymore. But think about it. That's over decades that steel casing starts deteriorating, especially when it's open like that, and stuff from the surface can get down in the water aquifer and stuff from the down in where those wells are like Clinton wells at 3,200 feet. So that's what you got to be concerned about. Now, there's some locales around the country. Fortunately, it's not a whole lot, but there's some instances where there'll be methane or natural gas naturally occurring in the water table, aquifer area, and that's just a naturally occurring occurrence. There's some areas at that. But there was just a report I saw in Wall Street Journal about a week ago that still substantiates there hasn't been any contamination from fracking itself, and there hasn't been any documentation. The U.S. EPA, under the past administrator, Lisa Jackson, tried really hard to find some. They thought they found one out in Wyoming a few years ago, and it turned out it was an abandoned well. So that's, so I'm convinced that we can produce this resource in an environmentally safe way and provide a lot of good jobs and opportunities, and also provide resources to, to grow our economy and create jobs.
As chairman of the Water Resource and Environmental Subcommittee, what major projects have you been working on?
That's a great question. That's where most of my time's been. We just completed a very bipartisan bill. It's called the Water Resources Reform and Development Act, otherwise known as WRDA. The last one was passed in 2007. And the WRDA bill is the bill that authorizes the projects and the processes of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So you think about all the projects. So we're talking about all the maritime transportation. That would be the river system, the Great Lakes, and all the ports in the United States. So we got 2/3 of this bill was reforms. And what really blew me away, and when I got in there, I became chairman of this committee about a month after I took office, February 2011, I think it was. And I found out in my hearings and stuff that was taking the Army Corps of Engineers 15 years, up to 15 years or something, I mean, a couple of instances even longer than that, to get the studies done before the first project, the actual backhoe or whatever, starts actual construction. And then I also found out we got one project on the river system down in Paducah, Kentucky, on the Ohio before it gets to the Mississippi, where it's been 3 decades and it's got about 8 years to go yet. And I actually went and visited it to find out what the heck was going on, because I can't imagine 3 decades and it's still going on, because we got to the moon faster than that, and I can't think of anything that's taken more than 30 years to get something done. And I said this at a meeting when I used to represent Morgan County. I thought it was kind of funny, and there was an older couple sitting in front of me, and she whispered over to her husband, and she goes, I said, you have to tell me if you can think of something that's taken more than 30 years to get something finished. And she whispered over her husband, goes, our house. I said, well, I can buy into that one. Okay, I'll give you that one. But so what we did in this bill, for an example, on that issue about the 15 years, we said we instituted what we call a 3x3x3, meaning it can't take more than 3 years to get the studies done. We're going to do all the studies. We're going to do all the environmental studies. All it needs to be done. But it can't take more than 3 years, can't cost more than $3 million. And the third part is, you got the core, you got the districts, like you were in the Huntington district, and then we got the Buffalo district, and the Detroit district, and the Louisville district, and Pittsburgh district. I don't know how many districts are around the country. And so they're doing their work, but then we say you got to be talking to the other 2 parts are the Army Corps, and the other 2 parts would be the regional. Here we have the Great Lakes region out of Cincinnati that has all those districts I just mentioned, and of course Washington D.C. So they've got to be communicating, and not one doing their work and then passing it up. They got to know what's going on. And the other major reform we did to help that on the studies is the Corps will be the lead agency, okay? And if any other part of the government wants to be involved, like Department of Interior, they have to be involved from day one. What's been happening, the Corps would go through, do their studies, take a couple years or whatever, and then the Department of Interior, for example, would come in and say, well, what about this? What about this? Well, by the time you do all those what ifs, most of the time they've done enough studies, they know what's going to happen, but they have to go through the whole process. And that's why it's taking so long. So time is money, and on a maritime transportation system, 95% of our exports at one time or another go through our maritime transportation system. The barges, through the ports. And so if we're not doing what we need to do at those locations, we're falling behind. And what I've learned, one of the reasons we've been competitive globally, a lot of our exports, especially our ag exports, is because we've got such an efficient transportation system, maritime, that we can move this stuff overseas to Asia in a very efficient manner, quite a bit cheaper than what Brazil can move soybeans, for example. And of course, the Chinese and everybody else is investing in those areas. The Panama Canal is being widened and deepered, and the new ships, the bigger ships, will be going through the Panama Canal in a year or so. Of our 10 top ports, only 2 of them can handle the ships fully loaded, because we don't have them down to the dredge, the depths that they need to be. So that's what this bill does on the transportation side, and we also have flood mitigation and eagle restoration, but it's mostly reforms, and to set the processes the Corps operates under, and also it authorizes the projects. Now that's an interesting issue. You ask, authorize the projects. Well, we set up a new thing. There's no earmarks in this bill, okay? The last bill in 2007 probably had this many earmarks. And there's no earmarks. And so what we did, the Senate, their idea when they did their word of bill before we came together, they just essentially defaulted to the executive branch. And I don't care who the president is, Republican or Democrat. I don't think the Congress should be defaulting our responsibilities to the executive branch by saying, you decide what projects the Corps will work on. And so what we did, we set up a new mechanism that I think will be more accountable and more transparent. And how it works is, here at the state of Ohio, your local port authorities, for example, your county commissioners, your state reps, state senators, working with the governor's office, will prioritize, we'll identify the needs out there and the challenges, okay? And I can talk about some of those because I've already been working on some of them. Okay, then the Corps every year then is responsible for putting together the list. They can only not put something on a list if it has absolutely no federal nexus, okay? And there's a couple laws pretty detailed on what that would be. So they have to bring the list to my committee every year. Now we can't add to the list. As a congressman, I can't say, well, here in Mount Vernon, they need something done. It's not on the list. I can't put it in. Okay, it has to be put in here locally and go through the process. So we would prioritize the list, and we can cross off and not authorize some of the projects. But that's how it works. So we come up what the needs are, and I think it's accountable because it'll be transparent, but I think it should grow at the local level and determine that. Working with your elected officials, including your congressman. Come on in.
Ma'am, you can come on in.
There's plenty of seats.
In the next couple of months, healthcare open enrollment will take place again. It's really difficult for a lot of families to find the money for healthcare insurance. So is there anything that can be done?
Well, I wasn't in Congress when they passed what's called Obamacare, because that's what they want to call it, because it's not affordable, the Affordable Care Act. Not one, but put this so everybody understands, that was a very partisan piece of legislation because not one Republican voted for it. It's all Democrats. And to me, I wasn't in Congress yet, but it kind of blew me away thinking that here's something that's, 1/5 of our economy. It affects every American. And it's a huge deal. I mean, and to not have bipartisan support doesn't make sense. For example, I was going to mention my word bill. You know what? When it passed out of the House, it was 417 to 3. That's pretty bipartisan. And I like to say it was bipartisan. 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat voted no. But something like the health care that's so important, it affects everybody. To be strictly partisan is that right there should be a red flag, because that's not right. Since I've been in Congress now, I voted, I've been told about 50 times, repealing it or replace it or changing some of it. Of course, the president has changed it quite a bit, and that's one reason why the House has actually got a lawsuit against the administration, because he's made some changes. The administration's made changes to Obamacare and didn't have the legal authority to do it. But anyways, I think I don't think there's any really disagreement that there needed to be health care reform. Okay, because the prices were going through the roof, people didn't have coverage, and it just wasn't right. So whatever we do, I have a couple principles that I think we need to adhere to. First of all, Obamacare is not working, in my opinion, and I don't support it, and I think we need to replace it. But we need to keep two principles in mind whatever we do. The first one is that whatever we do, it should be patient-driven, meaning that you as a patient working with your physician determine your needs and your health care, and not an insurance company and not a bureaucrat in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, Obamacare goes that way. And the second thing we should do, whatever we should do, we should institute market-based principles to encourage competition and cost control. And there's no doubt in my mind we need more competition in the health insurance market. That is broken. Especially when you only have 1 or 2 carriers in a state, and you can't go across state lines if you happen to live in one of those states. You're just kind of out of it, I guess. And there's things we can do there. I am a strong supporter of health savings accounts, and the reason I am, because I think one of the problems is I don't believe there's anything else in our economy where you have the third-party payer, if you have insurance, or Medicaid or Medicare care, and you don't know what all the costs are. When you go buy a car or refrigerator, you know what's the cost. It's competition, and so you don't really know. If you do check around to get some procedures done, like a colonoscopy, sometimes there's some big differences in cost between providers. So I would health savings accounts. Well, I like to really see them work, because the trouble with Obamacare, it's actually phasing out health savings accounts. But we ought to be phasing them in. And I'd like to see health savings accounts go for what I would call routine and preventative care. Now, think about this. You build up an account, your employer can kick in tax-free, you kick in as an employee, and that account stays with you. If you change jobs, move to California, if you're move to a better state than that. But anyways, you can do what you want. That's your. But think about this. Let's say you got your routine care. You go into your doctor's, and what really floors me, when you go into your doctor's office just for your annual checkup or whatever, all the paperwork and administration they're doing, it's unbelievable. You've seen it, and if you were going in there and paying 100% for that out of your health savings account, that eliminates a lot of administration costs, because they're not going to file for the copay from the different health insurers and blah, blah, blah. But the other thing it does, it's even more important. Now I'm talking in generally speaking, because I know there's someone out here who say, well, I do that already. Well, if you do, you're great. But most people probably don't. And that is, when you have an issue and you need some tests done, I'm not saying don't get the test done, but if you're paying for that out of your health savings account for routine preventative care, you're more than likely to have more of a frank conversation with your physician. What test does this do? Do I really need this one? And the doctor's more willing, way the current system, to order those tests, because if the insurance company will pay for them, that things are changing a little bit that way, because it's defensive medicine, and so that is the cost. And so I guess what I'm trying to say, I think health savings accounts is a way to bring back personal responsibility, and because I think we all should be responsible for our health, and working with your physician to determine what you need, what your treatments you need, and so on, and where it's going. It's too bad that we've seen now under Obamacare on the exchanges, depending on who you bought coverage from, you may not be able to see your doctor or your hospital because they're not in that network and that. And I had to go on Obamacare as a member of Congress, and I had about 4 or 5 options, and only one option was good, because the only one option was where I doctor the Worcester Clinic, which is now Cleveland Clinic, and so on. And the others, they're not in that part of the system. So, it's not. I think it's limiting access, and hasn't really done anything on cost containment, other than basically say it ends up being rationing. And I did back when my Farm Bureau days. It's kind of interesting. I was on the State Farm Bureau board, and back then they had health insurance partnered with Nationwide Insurance, because they founded Nationwide years ago. And I was always chairman of the insurance committee. It's kind of like I was almost penalizing me. I think it wasn't, but back when they were talking about national health insurance, back when President Clinton got elected, I was the guy who was chairman of the committee that had to raise the rates, and all the farmers out there had a group of farmers, including myself at the time. And so we decided, the one time we took a about 4-day trip up to Toronto and up into Canada to see what their system was. And I had no idea back then. I was pretty naive. This is like 92, 93 probably. And it was interesting. We got up there. I didn't realize at the time, I think Canada's actually it's going the other way now, but how socialistic it was, and how they were taxed everything. I mean, the taxes up there were atrocious. And they told us, they said, if you got an ear infection or a sore throat, we can take care of it pretty fast. But if you need a heart bypass or a hip replacement or an MRI, you're on a waiting list. And we met with provincial government and national government officials. And what became evident to me was the reason the Canadian system has managed to stay around is because a lot of Canadians are coming to the United States. They come down to the Cleveland Clinic, they come to the Mayo Clinic to get their hip replacements and their bypass surgeries. And so we've been the safety valve that's kept their system going. There was absolutely, at that time anyways, no research and development, really. That's the United States. And that's another thing I'm concerned about. We're going this way with more national type health coverage. What happens to our research and development? Because if you think about my lifetime, where we've come in cancer, heart, cardiac disease, treating and all that, and that's all because of the research done in this country. I got off track there.
Did you say that Congress is required to get their health insurance the same way everybody else through the open enrollments?
The question is kind of yes and no. As a federal employee, members of Congress have the same health insurance all federal employees have, and like people that work in the private sector, if your employers, I've been surprised. There's some employers that pay 100% of their employees' health care. I've found quite a few of them. That really surprised me. But anyways, so we've got the same as all federal employees. They have to go on Obamacare to get the federal taxpayer part of that, and we pay our share, 25%. My health insurance, when I had to switch over to Obamacare, went up about $120 a month, the part that I was paying. There's nothing else special. There's a tendency to think that members of Congress get a special deal. Maybe they did back in the 80s, because I know there's a lot of things that happened back then that it's not happening today. It's been changed.
What are you doing specifically for the people of the 7th District of Ohio?
Well, obviously, in Congress, there's a couple of things you do. You obviously vote on legislation that affects everybody. So you got that kind of indirect effect, like when I pass my water bill, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then there's constituent stuff. We do a lot of constituent work, and with individuals and businesses that have issues, and most of the time we're pretty successful. The VA's been very, that one's been very frustrating. We just had a person pass away that actually I think he was from this area, that was getting treatment down in Dayton, and they couldn't get the treatment. Waited 3 years, and finally they got him in a private sector facility, and they wouldn't see him. And they had the audacity this week to call the widow, his wife, up and say, "How's he doing? We got an appointment for him now. He passed away here in August." So there's some things that we've been fighting the VA, sort of example. But let me bring up the water. In my chairmanship, we've got several issues with the Army Corps, and one was a big one. It's not quite in the district, but it affects people in the 7th District. It's called the Port of Cleveland. Port of Cleveland, there's an issue about what to do with the dredge material up there. They've been putting in what they call a CDF, a confined landfill, because the Cuyahoga River, has been so dirty over the years. And it's a lot better than it used to be. It's not catching fire anymore. And the Army Corps wanted to do open lake disposal. And the Highway EPA said no, it didn't meet the standards. And so we had this big, argument. I facilitated working with the Corps and the Highway EPA and got the dredging done this year. And this was really important because we had one facility up there that was going to have to shut down and lay off almost 2,000 employees because they couldn't get enough iron ore in without that river being dredged. And it also affects my constituents in Shelby County, where they have a steel facility, which is in the 7th District. And right now, I'm facilitating meetings because going forward, we still have the problem. And now we've got the issue, out in Western Lake Erie, the algae blooms and the phosphorus and they are doing open lake disposal out there, and also in Ashtabula. And so I facilitated a meeting here in the first part of November where I'm bringing in the General Peabody. He's the 2-star general. He's the second guy in command. General Bostic's the 3-star general, but he's the Corps worldwide. This guy's domestic. So, and he grew up in Norwalk, a good guy. And Craig Butler, Howard EPA, and Will Friedman, the port director in Cleveland. And so I'm sitting them down and said, we're going to get this worked out because we're not going here next spring and saying we're not doing any dredging, and people are going to lose their jobs and that. So that's pretty direct. Got another Corps issue in Avon. We're just getting resolved, where the EPA and the Corps came in, said to the 3 homeowners that built their homes about 6 years ago, didn't know that they were building on a wetland. Nobody knew except the Corps knew, but didn't tell anybody. And now the Corps came in and said, well, you got to mitigate this. It's going to cost a minimum of $25,000 each. That's pretty much a shocker all of a sudden, and we're getting that taken care of. Got an issue at the Holmes County Fairgrounds, another Corps issue. So those are some of the Corps issues. So there's on the transportation side, we've been working with the Ashland Rail. They're doing an expansion up in Richland and Ashland, things like that. That's off the top of my head. So there's quite a few things. It's really kind of, you start thinking about it, making a list. There's quite a few, but we felt since there's no earmarks, we can't do like they used to do in the past. And I've told constituents, you're not going to see the Bob Gibbs Federal Bill and the Bob Gibbs Bridge, like my good friend Ralph Regula up in Stark County, because that's how it used to work. And so we partner with the local governments, and when there's grants available, we've looked into it and helped them get the grant money, and we've done quite a bit of that. So things like that directly in constituent stuff.
I think we have a few minutes left. Are there any questions from anyone in the audience?
Yes, sir.
What's going on with the Benghazi investigation?
Good question. The question was what's going on with the Benghazi investigation. Last week, I know him really well. I can't think of his name right. Gowdy. Greg, yeah, I know. I picture him because he's got one heck of a haircut, Trey Gowdy. They had their first public hearing, and as you know, probably Trey's former prosecutor never lost a case, I guess, but he's a dog, going after things. There's been more stuff happening both in the Benghazi and the IRS. The problem, this challenge for Congress, is to get the information from the executive branch. They're not too forthcoming, We get a lot of redacted stuff, especially in the IRS stuff, a lot of redacted stuff, and then you had to go back in and do that. But Mcgowsey, there's no question that, in my opinion, somebody really messed up or didn't do what they should have done. It was obviously not a video. We know that. That inspired it. It was a fight that went on for about 8 or 10 hours, something like that. We don't know what if they could have called in support help. Why was the ambassador? Why were we still there if it was that bad in Libya? So it's still going on. It just takes so long, and now you're more in. It's still legislative oversight, but now you're moving in with that special committee at Trace. It's more of dispositions and more like in a legal setting, and so they've done some stuff that hasn't come out yet.
Do you think Hillary Clinton will ever be held accountable?
Held accountable. The question was about Hillary Clinton ever being held accountable. I don't know how she's not. I mean, when she made that statement, what difference does it make now? Well, it does, because 4 Americans are dead and an ambassador. We don't leave people behind like that. That's not how we do things. And we got our American troops and special forces and all of them, and that risk their lives and put their lives on the line and lose their lives in some cases to rescue Americans in trouble. And so this is just unprecedented. And it's just hard for me to believe that we didn't have any military assets within that time frame, or our allies didn't. It's just hard to believe what happened. And then also keep in mind, earlier in April that year and in June, we knew there was a threat that the ambassador actually asked for more security, because Great Britain had left. They pulled out. As I remember right, the Red Cross had pulled out, and we were there, and we were asking. And he was the ambassador was asking for more security, and they actually didn't give him more security. They actually took security away, and so the whole thing's bizarre. But the House of Representatives has been very busy with the oversight hearings, and because there's been so many. I can go through and try to list them, but it's just amazing that. How many there's been that we know about this stuff because of the House Oversight Hearings. I'm guessing that being on the House Oversight Committee that I'm not on, Jim Jordan's on from Ohio, that lots of times it's probably a pretty boring committee, doesn't do much, but it's been a real busy committee the last while. And, the scandals in this administration are just, you have administration might have a scandal here and there, but the number of these is just unbelievable. And so.
Mrs. Vail, did you have a question?
I have half a dozen questions.
Let's start with one.
The first one is, the presidential family and the campaign expenses, the plane, all the on-ground expenses amount to millions of dollars. What might be done to correct that?
Well, some of that, we have these 12 appropriation bills I talked about. This would be in discretionary spending. And we've made cuts because the House has been doing those appropriation bills. And we did a budget. And we actually embarrassed the Senate this year into doing a budget. Remember that earlier this year, no pay, no budget, no pay. And I would argue probably 98 of 100 senators don't need their paycheck, but it was embarrassing to them. But anyway, so we've made cuts, I know, in the House budget, that the House administration budgets that funds our offices and everything. We've cut that almost 20% since I've been there. I know the EPA, we've cut that. I'd have to look and see what we've done in the executive branch. Of course, the only problem is those bills never made it all the way to the law, so they did these CRs. And so what we tried to do in the CRs, because the Senate hasn't taken up any of the appropriation bills, is try to pass the CRs based on the budget that we did get passed. So the CR that we just got passed that goes to December 11th was based on that budget.
I was asking specifically
Oh, I know.
about the presidential family and the presidential campaigning that is constant.
No, I know, and we'd have to do it through the budget process. And
So that kind of money was appropriated?
I can't answer specifically how that all fits in. I'm sure, I think I can probably say with some confidence that the executive budget's been cut. Now, the executive budget, you gotta remember, the executive budget would count all the executive branch. You know, I think it's difficult to get into those specifics. We're kind of like the board of directors, you know? And another thing they do, I learned since I've been in Congress, they got this thing they call reprogramming, where they can take monies that's already been appropriated for something and reprogram it to another thing as long as they don't go over the budget caps. And that's what happened on this authorization to train certain Syrian rebels. There was no appropriation for that. It was just an authorization, and the president's going to reprogram some money, so it stays under the budget caps. There was no additional appropriation for that, for example.
Sir, did you have a question?
Yeah.
Is there anything positive happening concerning the Mexican border and the people coming across?
The question was, I'm laughing, but I shouldn't be. The question was, is there anything positive happening with the Mexican border with the illegals coming across? Well, when the House left for the August work period, we were supposed to leave Thursday night, and we left Friday night because they didn't have, I'm trying to remember now, there wasn't the votes to do something, and a bunch of us raised so much heck with the leadership, speaker and leadership, that we have to do something. We can't go home for the month of August while this is going on. So we did pass a bill, and I'm trying to remember the numbers. The bill we passed out of the House, the majority of the money, I want to say $600 million, but don't hold me to that, I can't remember for sure, went for border security, because I'm a strong advocate that what we have to do before we talk, you know, in this immigration, or what we do with all the illegals in this country, we got to secure the border first. And obviously the border's not secure when we got kids, not just teenagers, but kids coming across. I just heard one report that a 13-year-old teenager was carrying a 3-month-old baby across back in July. And now it tapered off a little bit here in August because it's pretty hard to get through that desert. I'm a little concerned that they expect the numbers to ramp up again here this fall and winter. But the reason I say you got to secure the border first, the analogy I use, I guess, because I've been doing all this water stuff. Oh, just another thought. I'll get back to you in a second. I have to stop. You asked me what we're doing. One thing I did in my water bill, I put in there a program called WIFIA, which is Water Infrastructure Financing, to encourage private partnership and private-public partnership to do wastewater and drinking water infrastructure. And almost every municipality and village in the country is under an EPA edict or have done something. And the ratepayers can't do that, but there's a lot of private money can come in. And so we set up this pilot program to start that to help supplement the state revolving fund. I just thought of that one, but okay. Back on the border. What I'd say on the border, the analogy I like to use, when the levee or the dam breaks and the floodwaters are coming in, you can't start cleaning up the flood until you fix it from coming in. You know, you couldn't start cleaning up from Katrina or anything else, or the Mississippi River flooded there and back, whenever it was, until you stop the floodwaters coming in, or they stop. And so this thought that we can go ahead, because what the president proposed that the Senate didn't take up was to spend a bunch of money. I think it was close to $3 billion. It was $3.7 billion, and it was for nothing, not very little of it to go to border security, and so other things. I don't think my position's been we can't address the illegal immigrant issue, the illegal aliens, until we secure the border, because otherwise you just send the wrong message. And so that's what we're, and the House, Republican-controlled House, has been there, and that's what we voted, and that's what we passed. Of course, the Senate didn't take it. They went home on Thursday, and they haven't taken it up since. And so that's really frustrating. Now, another thing that we passed in that bill was to pay for more judges to adjudicate these cases. You've heard about how they're shipping these kids all around the country. The reason they're doing that is it could take like 5 years before they get before a judge. And so we're saying, what we said, and then because of the law, is that the first ones in be the first ones to get before the judge, because that sends a strong signal if we start sending them back. Then we're also having that bill, like, I don't remember the dollars, for Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, working with their governments to first of all, do a couple things. One, make the people down there know that just because you get here doesn't mean you might not be able to stay. And the second is to work to try to fix those problems, because it was costing, just off the top of my head, I remember this, I think it was between $300 to $800 a day per kid. It's costing U.S. taxpayers, between the medical treatments and all that. And now they're shipping around the country, and we've got issues, you know, immunizations, or they might be carrying in, you know, stuff that would, you know, could be problems, health issues, and can put burdens on the local education system and all kinds of things. So this is really unfortunate. We stayed around to pass a bill to address it, and the Senate went home, and that's where we're at.
We probably have time for one more question.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned Social Security earlier.
Yep.
Projections are that benefits will be cut 25% in 2030 if nothing is done to keep the system solid. What do you think should be done?
Well, I think your projections, I've seen projections all over the place, but I would say that could be true. We got a serious problem because you know, you think about it. Well, the real problem right now is Medicare. That's the real problem. Social Security is a problem, but what's killing us in the federal budget is Medicare. Okay, but that's another issue. Social Security, I think you go back, and I voted, and we've done this in the House and some of the budgets we've done since I've been there, to say that if you're, at the time it was 55 or younger. Of course, every year you go, that kind of doesn't hold true, but that I'm trying to remember. 55 or younger, there would be some benefit changes, and you know, to make it sustainable so it's around. If you talk a lot of 20s and 30s something people, they don't think they'll have it. You talk to a lot of them, and you know, we can have that if we just get serious about fixing it, and so I think you got. And then I think another thing, there's some people that probably don't, they're retired, that probably really don't need it. There's a question, could we do something, give them some type of a tax credit or something if they don't take Social Security? It's another thought. You know, it's because there's the people that, you know, are wealthy enough that don't need it, and maybe we could do something on the other side to help them. But
May not need it, but they paid for it.
well, I know that's why I think it's important that we do something in the tax code somewhere to help them. You know, an incentive for, if you don't take it, at least you get a benefit here. I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, you know. But that's some of the things we need to think about.
Possibility of incrementally.
Wait, what is that?
The possibility of incrementally raising the tax very slowly over a period of 15 years.
I don't know if we do that, it's going to have to be bipartisan, because as soon as one side says it, well, the Republicans say it, we get you know, crucified. So whatever we do when it comes to those, that's to be bipartisan solution. And so you know, as far as I'm concerned, everything's on the table for discussion. Just like on the tax reform, Dave Camp, the chairman, who will be leading Congress at the end of the year, put out a proposal. I think there's some good things in it. There's some things in there I don't like, but I think it's good to have the discussion and the debate, and hopefully we can do something next year. But that's, you know, I think you can't have major changes. You know, healthcare obviously is one. Taxes reform is obviously another one. You can't have major changes and just push it onto the American people. I think we have to have a national discussion, and so people realize, you know, what's the pros and cons, and figure this out. And I think that's what helpful, is to have that national discussion, and which obviously didn't happen in Obamacare. I think you got your hand up.
You were mentioning healthcare and Canada.
Yeah.
Well, the UK is like Canada. In fact, it's even bigger.
I think they got two systems over there more.
Well, they do. They
Yeah.
do. I just had a friend over here visiting, and for 10 days, and I had to have some blood taken last Friday, and I got the results within 24 hours, and she said, I would have had to wait 2 weeks for that.
Yeah.
And she said 6 months for surgery.
Hmm.
So I told her that if you ever need any kind of knee surgery, which I have,
Yeah.
you come here, and I know exactly who
Yeah.
you go to.
Yeah. When I talk about rationing, that's how rationing occurs. We had a friend here a year and a half ago, about my age, Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock, she was having really bad chest pains. And at 11 o'clock, she was having quadruple bypass. That would not happen in Canada or England. And what would happen, it would be months, and she probably would be dead. And so that's how you ration, because, you know, that's how rationing indirectly, by default, happens. And speaking of that, when I was up in Canada there in the early 90s, it must have been, I don't know if it was CAT scans or MRIs. I can't remember which one it was. They only had like 6 in the whole country. We had more than that in the city of Cleveland, and that's part of the problem. They don't have, when government's doing something, they don't have the money to invest. It just doesn't work. And what's made this, I'll just close on this, I guess. What's made this country, I believe, great is obviously our free market system and our system of government, because anybody that wants to work hard, we don't guarantee that they're successful, but they have the opportunity. You go to other places in the world, they don't have the opportunity. And our system encourages innovation and entrepreneurship. And what we've done, we've created wealth in this country. And what I mean by wealth is you take something and you add value to something that people need. And I believe there's really 3 basic ways you create wealth. One is you raise or grow it, agriculture. 2 is you responsibly develop our natural resources, that's mine or drill it. And 3 is you make it, manufacturing. And because you're making something and the reason I think about this, my dad was an insurance broker. And one day when I first started raising hogs in Holmes County back in mid-70s, I was like 22 years old or whatever. He came down one weekend. He said, this is great what you're doing. I said, yeah, well, what's so great about it? You're creating wealth. I said, no, first I said, I'm going to get rich? No, that's not what I meant. You're taking something and you're adding value that people need. And also down the road, I was creating a lot of jobs because I bought, a lot of inputs, And you think about when a farmer puts that soybean seed, that corn seed in the ground, harvests it here this time of year now, where that crop goes and all the things it does, all the jobs it creates. That's what I mean by creating wealth. And we've done really well in this country. And the problem is the federal government right now has got their foot on people's throat. They're choking entrepreneurship, innovation, and it's, through very burdensome regulations, of red tape. And I didn't mention some of their bills I had about the regulatory side, but, in a free market system, you have to have some level of regulations, but they have to make sense. And the simple template I suggest is when a business person here in Mount Vernon has something come across their desk, and they look at it, something they're going to have to do, a mandate from the federal government, a new regulation, they should be able to look at that and go, this makes sense. We should be doing this. Versus, why the hell are we doing this? And we got duplicate regulations now, just layers and layers and layers. They never sunset anything. They never go back and review. We really need it. And all we're doing is raising our electrical costs and our other energy costs and all these other costs. And I don't think we're seeing a whole lot of benefit from what we're doing now. So glad to be here tonight. And take care. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman.